Starting the plant kingdom now. Characteristics of plants. First of all, this is another multicellular kingdom. The fungi was the first of the multicellular kingdom that we have talked about in the eukaryotic domain, or domain eukarya. It is the first of the two that are completely and totally made up of multicellular organisms. Because as we learned in kingdom fungi, there was an exception. Yeast was a single-celled organism. That category, yeasts, there's multiple types, were allowed in because they didn't do anything non-fungal-like. That's not the case here in plants, and you'll find also not in animals. Everything that was single-celled, that was similar to plants or animals, was taken out and put in kingdom Protista because they all did something not plant-like or not animal-like. And part of that has to do with the definition of plants, as you'll see here. They have an alternation of generation life cycle. I talked about that with green algae because the green algae also exhibited that characteristic. I said then that I would talk about it later, and so this presentation will be the later. And because of the similarities between the green algae and the plants, we think they share a common ancestor. And those similarities are these things right here. You have seen this slide before. This was in the algae, and it was worded similarly. It said similarities with plants instead of with green algae. Same 3 points, so if you memorize them then, you know them then, you've got them already. They have chlorophyll A and B and carotenoid pigments, okay, which are used in photosynthesis. They use starch, and they have cellulose. How they're different. These, actually it's 5 things because I got 2 more on the other slide. But if you take these 5 things, you read them, you look at them, they're all due to the fact that plants are multicellular. Every one of these things are possible, okay, because the plants have more than one cell. The fact that they even have roots is because they're multicellular. They can have specialized and differentiated tissue that do their differentiated tissue do different functions, okay? So roots, leaves, stems, organs such as the stomata that function in gas exchange. These are all the vascular systems, xylem and phloem, made up of different cell types themselves. That's all because they're multicellular. So this really boils down to just one characteristic. And so that's kind of a key point on the test, because when I ask you to tell me how plants are different from algae, it's really just the fact that they're multicellular, because all of this is possible, okay? Being able to protect small cells in tissues of larger cells, okay? These are little haploid cells in your diploid cells, but multiple tissues made up of those is all characteristic of multicellular, okay? Here we go with alternation of generations. So this is a 2-generation life cycle. It alternates between the sporophyte and the gametophyte. And the reason I want to talk about it here is because I think it's easier to visualize with plants than with 2 single-celled structures that really don't look a lot different to you. I want to try to pick something that maybe you could visualize, and the example I use is going to be very generic and maybe not completely accurate, but I'm trying to get you to visualize it, because for me as a student, this was something really difficult to wrap my brain around. So let's define our 2 words. Sporophyte is the diploid generation. We haven't had genetics yet. Exactly, I've hinted at here and there. Diploid means 2, di means 2, ploidy. Ploidy is your number of chromosomes, chromosome sets. So this means you've got 2 chromosome sets. Now, the problem with plants is that not all plants have 2 chromosome sets. Mendel's peas did. When we get to genetics, you'll see that. But plants are more complex than animals. I keep saying that. I've been saying that all semester. Animals, we have One set we inherit from mom and one set we inherit from dad, and that gives us two. So we're called diploid. When we're talking about plants and somebody uses the term diploid, it is kind of a default word. And what it means is that it's the full complement of chromosomes, however many that particular species has. So with plants, we have what's called polyploidy. Instead of inheriting one set from mom and one set from dad, they might inherit two sets from mom and two sets from dad, or three sets and three sets and four. So you can have, tetraploidy, hexaploidy, octoploidy. Yeah. So whatever the full chromosome complement is referred to as diploid, and whatever half of that would be, okay, the three from mom, three from dad, the male female plant, obviously. I'm just using those figuratively. That's going to be considered haploid. Haploid, it's like half the ploidy. This is what that means. So our sporophyte here produces haploid spores. They have half the chromosome number. They're produced by meiosis. And the structures that produce those are called sporangia. Spores produced in sporangia. That sounds kind of similar to our fungi, doesn't it? These spores are haploid, develop directly into gametophytes. Now, the gametophyte is the next generation. It's a haploid generation. All of the structures, all of the cells that make up this structure they are going to be haploid, have half the chromosome number. And then these structures, the gametophyte, will produce gametes, which is the biological inclusive term for both egg and sperm. Egg and sperm will unite to form a zygote, and we refer to that as 2N. Again, that's another way to say diploid, or in the case of something that's not diploid but polyploid, the full complement. That in turn will develop into a sporophyte. And so we go round and around and around here, okay, every other generation. So, for example, you can have one plant, and usually the sporophyte is the one that we recognize. If I name a plant that you know of and you have a picture in your mind of that plant, what you're probably seeing is the sporophyte. Because most of our phyla that we're going to go through, that is the dominant generation. The gametophyte generation is very small, very reduced. In many cases, it stays attached to the sporophyte. An example would be flowers. Okay, flowers are actually a gametophyte attached to a sporophyte, where the reproductive structure of the flower itself, the cells are haploid and it's going to produce the egg and the sperm. Okay, but let's talk about this one that doesn't stay attached, because as a student, I was like, why are we saying it has two generations? Let's just say that the reproductive structure, the reproductive organs are made up of haploid cells and call it good. But in some plants, you have a sporophyte producing spores that are carried away by wind or water. Some vector is going to carry these spores away far from the sporophyte. And these spores will find a place to grow, and they will develop into this gametophyte that looks nothing like the sporophyte. We would not even recognize it if we saw it outside walking around. We could see the sporophyte, we'd know what it is, not maybe 10 yards away, we'd find a gametophyte and not know that it was the same plant or that they were the same species. Okay. And this structure, all the cells in this structure are going to be haploid. It's going to produce the gametes. And then that zygote will, again, get carried somewhere else, usually far away, okay, by some vector, and develop into a sporophyte. So the grandchild looks like the grandparent, okay? Parent, child, grandchild, okay? Every other generation. And that's why it's called alternation of generations. And it's just a little weird. It's a plant thing. It's one thing that makes them more complex than animals. And there's then the genetics, of course, obviously. So, but I wanted to spend a little time on that here and not with the algae, because I thought in talking about a plant, something you can visualize, something large. Sporophyte's usually pretty large. The gametophyte, in most cases, is very small, tiny, reduced comparison to the sporophyte. And if you could visualize that and that they're separate, then that would be something that might help you understand this a little bit better than introducing it with two single cells that you're looking at the picture going, I don't see the difference, because it's just genetic is the difference that's there. Okay. So all plants are going to have both generations. One is dominant over the other. It's going to last longer, whichever one the dominant is. Typically, sporophyte is going to last longer than the other one. It's going to be larger. It's more complex. It's the one usually recognized where the other one's not by us. And that's where I want to end this. You'll see with our first phylum here that that's where the exception of the sporophyte not being the dominant one is. But we'll quit here and pick that up on the next presentation.